Welcome to another episode of Scoops and Revelations, where we talk about the Doctor Who stories and what we learn in each one about the Doctor's history, and about the Doctor's universe. In this one, we're going to be talking about that great first Doctor adventure, The Aztecs, by John Lucarotti. We're never given the year of this adventure, but we can narrow it down a bit. Barbara comments that the body in the tomb must have died around 1430, so it must take place sometime after that. But it has to be prior to 1520, when Cortez arrived. Ixta's father is said to have designed the tomb, so we must be approximately one generation after the dead body was put in there. So this would place it around maybe 1455. The Doctor describes himself as a scientist and an engineer. Although we had an inkling of this already, it confirms that his pioneering efforts among his own people were in science and engineering. This is the first time we see the Doctor with a love interest, and the last in a long time. For those who are skeptical that the Doctor truly has romantic feelings for Kameka, consider these facts. The Doctor is struck by Kameka as soon as he lays eyes on her. When Ian is talking to him, he's only partly paying attention because he's distracted by Kameka's presence. When she is absent for a bit and returns, he tells her, "The garden's been a lonely place without you." And although he does not know the symbolic meaning of the cocoa drink, when he gives it to her, he calls it a token of my esteem. She tells him, "You've declared your love for me," and he nods. He's surprised only when she says that he's proposed marriage. Now, one can certainly argue that the Doctor is playing a role in order to use her to his advantage, but it doesn't appear to be the case, at least not fully, because there are things he does which are unnecessary to his obtaining access to the TARDIS. So, my take on it is, he likes. But here's the most fascinating part of the story. We know that story editor David Whittaker was keen not to have the time travelers change history, right? And the subject is worked directly into this story. The Doctor utters to Barbara a now famous line, "But you can't rewrite history, not one line." This comment can be, and has been, interpreted in several different ways. One, that when the Doctor says can't, he means mustn't. Interference in history is not permissible for some reason. And that's the interpretation that the next story editor, Dennis Spooner, will take. For example, see The Time Meddler. And in later Doctor Who stories, we get an indication that the Doctor's own people are the ones who have forbidden interference in history. See The War Games. But this doesn't seem to be what the Doctor means in this story, because he follows up by saying, "What you are trying to do is impossible. I know. Believe me, I know." That statement indicates that he's talking about more than just a rule here. Number two, it could be interpreted that the Doctor's saying that the laws of physics or nature or time make it impossible to change history. In this scenario, it's not a law made by people, but universal laws built right into the fabric of time and space that will not permit the altering of history. This interpretation coincides with the ideas laid down by David Whittaker himself, who saw history as fixed and unalterable. But we can't accept Whittaker's principle because the Doctor and his companions can change history. And I don't mean simply that we see it later on in the show, but we've seen it already in the show. They have clearly had an impact on the history of Skaro, the history of Marinus, in very large ways. They helped to destroy the Daleks and the conscience of Marinus. Both of those acts must have affected the paths of history for both of those planets in substantial ways. Whittaker contradicts himself. Third possible interpretation. Universal laws prevent the altering of history only on the planet Earth, and only in the past. And these laws apply only to Barbara and Ian because it is their planet and their past. This interpretation can't be the case either, though, because Barbara does change history in this very story. She causes the High Priest to resign and to be replaced by another. That change in leadership would not have happened without her interference. Granted, this may not be a major alteration of time, but that doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. Either one can change history or one cannot. She changes history. There's no question about it. Similarly, she and Ian played a major part in the foiling of an attempt on Kublai Khan's life in Marco Polo. The history of Earth is therefore alterable by human time travelers, even in early Doctor Who. Another interpretation, the fourth one, is that the Doctor's referring to a fixed point in time, which cannot be changed. This is the interpretation taken in the Russell T. Davies era of the program. See The Fires of Pompeii. The advantage of this interpretation is that it allows for the altering of history on most occasions, but there are certain historical events that are fixed by universal laws and are impervious to change. Unfortunately, that interpretation does not work in the Aztecs because it's not a point in time that Barbara's attempting to alter. Her goal is to change an entire culture, not a specific event. So wait, if it's not any of those four interpretations, what is it? Well, I'll tell you what I think. The Doctor's making 2 points. First, that Barbara must not interfere with history, not one line, because it's forbidden to do so. That coincides with interpretation number 1. But he makes the additional point that it is utterly impossible for Barbara to change the culture of the Aztecs. He explicitly says this in episode 2, arguing that their ways are too ingrained, the Aztecs' ways. Ian likewise tells her in episode 3 that the people as a whole are like Tlotoxl, and that Autloc is the extraordinary one. He says, "You can't fight a whole way of life, Barbara." This explanation fits the evidence best. History is alterable, but it is impossible for one person to have such a significant effect on history that an entire way of life can be changed, even one line of it in the history books. So that's how I look at the Doctor's statements. Tell me what you think in the comments below if you think I'm way off base, but that seems to make the most sense to me. Anyway, thank you for listening to this episode of Scoops and Revelations, and we're going to talk about, yes, you guessed it, the Sensorites next. So please subscribe, hit the bell so you know when it comes out, and I'll see you next time.